Welcome, everybody. If your experience is anything like mine has been in dealing with vendors over the year, you're going to have encountered a variety of business-related issues. What we're going to discuss today is important points from my experience that I've learned regarding the 7 essential elements of vendor management. And I've got them shown here. It includes a strategic view of procurement, a suggested strategy for managing vendors to increase business value, the role of the vendor manager as distinct from historical procurement types of responsibilities. I'll talk a little bit about the vendor business plan, some comments on shared performance metrics, critical success factors, and finally core competencies. So if your experience is anything like mine, you will have probably encountered some or many of these types of experiences that make it a challenge to manage your business relations with vendors. First of all, there could be too many vendors. The vendor capabilities may be unreliable, at least in the early stages of vendor activity. In a variety of inabilities to develop strategic partners, many vendors prefer to have only a tactical arm's length relationship. I've seen vendors who do not accept the customer's problems as their own and therefore are not committed to the same level of achieving a satisfactory solution, and an ability to determine the level of investment that a vendor may put into the relationship. Or you may have no single vendor manager with overall authority for all of the vendor's products and services. There could be a lack of the emphasis on cost reduction initiatives from the vendor. And you may encounter the absence of a champion in the vendor's organization who's really going to step up to do everything to achieve the combined goals of the relationship. And actually, there's more. Vendors' responsibilities in the event of a disaster or a catastrophe may be unclear. Oftentimes, I've encountered relationships with partners that didn't include clear, well-defined metrics for how the vendor is going to manage their part of the relationship. You may also encounter multiple contracts for the same vendor. This has been particularly applicable in my experience with vendors that have worldwide responsibility. A vendor contract in the U.S. is not necessarily the same, has the same terms and conditions as a vendor contract in other countries, particularly in third world countries. There could be multiple or inconsistent services, prices, and terms from the same vendor, again, on a worldwide basis, same products or similar services being sold differently, priced differently. The business relationship may be viewed differently by both the vendor and the customer. Poor communication, not only electronic communication, but the inability to develop a strong relationship with the people who are the decision makers in the vendor's organization, lack of shared critical success factors, and finally, no clear vendor risk in the game or skin in the game. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. To me, the relationship between a client and a vendor is similar to, spans a spectrum. This is often similar to the same concept for buying insurance. On the one hand, you can spend a lot for all kinds of insurance, and you can be protected completely for almost any sort of disaster or catastrophe or unplanned eventuality. Or you can spend very little and not have much financial protection in the event that unplanned events happen to your business. It's a similar concept with the relationship with vendors. You can have a tactical relationship based on arm's length periodic transactions where you're buying products, the vendor ships products, and there's not much other activity that takes place other than sending invoices and receiving payments. Or on the other extreme, you could have a strategic relationship based upon some sort of close-in joint venture. I think the extreme kind of situation like this could be where there is shared equity between the partners. And along this continuum are a variety of points that can represent the nature of the relationship between the client and the vendor partner. In my experience, however, it's very rare that both clients or vendors make a conscious decision of where they want to exist along this continuum, or they may choose to have their relationships span the continuum, but they manage those relationships the same way across the entire continuum. So here's another slide that kind of expresses the same sort of thing. And the real question is, where do you want to be with your business along this continuum with any specific vendor or any categories of types of vendors? This leads us to the first of what I'm going to talk about in terms of business models for managing vendors. And this is a visual representation of the structure you might want to consider for managing vendors. And it's very, very different from a purchasing department where procurement representatives have the primary responsibility for dealing with vendors. And oftentimes those purchasing representatives are not part of the business unit or the client's business needs. This diagram suggests that from a strategic perspective, you might want to be focused on strategic plans from both partners in the relationship, which are supported, of course, by a variety of agreements and contracts, and are supported over time by the performance of the vendors that you may be dealing with. One of the things that I learned by working with a Fortune 500 company was the importance of establishing a vendor management board at the enterprise level, where people further down in the organization have access to, are supported by, and receive strategic direction from senior executives regarding how the company chooses to manage its relationships with vendors. What constitutes a strategic vendor? What constitutes a tactical vendor? This feeds into a variety of vendor programs which are designed to support various lines of business within the client organization. Lines of business are supported, of course, by normal functional units, sales, marketing, engineering, operations, etc. And one of those units could be the part of the organization that is involved in purchasing. Might be found in operations, might be found in the finance department. But that, to a certain extent, is